also wanted to talk about just maybe some different aspects of the stadiums. We're going SEC stadiums tonight, and then I'll go national later down the road, because I grew up covering the SEC from my time in radio to my time in both sports and news TV. So let's just touch on these for a second. LSU, yeah, it's going to be on the list, but I'm going to go 5-1 here right quick. I'm not going to do some big fancy countdown, but there's one at number 5 that kind of surprised Colin a little bit when I showed up, because there was one that wasn't on the list that I'm going to explain. The one that's not on the list is Neyland Stadium. And the really only reason that they're not on the list is because to this point, I've not covered a game at Neyland where Tennessee's any good. And so it really, really impacts my perception of covering a game there for obvious reasons. Now, if you have listened to the show, you know that I think maybe the time is in the mid-range future where there will be very competitive games at Neyland Stadium again. So a lot about Neyland is great. Folks showing up, even though they're a 3-touchdown underdog in the times that I've been there, obviously. Really modernized underneath the stadium. A lot to like. As Colin pointed out, it's one of less than half a dozen FBS program stadiums on a river. You can drive a boat to the game. All that's well and good. My number 5 stadium, though, was South Carolina. South Carolina, to me, is the most underrated. I'll call them a major venue because, listen, relative to everywhere outside of the SEC, Williams-Brice Stadium is a huge stadium. You don't think about them within the context of like Bryant-Denny, Tiger Stadium, Kyle Field, but Williams-Brice Stadium is a really fun place to go. It's very accessible. Also, they have recently modernized. There's a lot about the underbelly of the stadium that I like. And I also really think that from an atmosphere, a game day atmosphere standpoint, I think Williams-Brice Stadium's wildly underrated. This past year, I think it was, I was there for the Alabama game. And Alabama was a huge favorite. Alabama ended up winning the game by a substantial margin. That place was very, very, very charged. And what it makes me think of anytime I'm at a place like that, and eventually it dies down once order is restored and the road team takes the lead for good, what it makes me think is, man, like what is this place ever going to be like if and when Will Muschamp, in this case, gets the ship righted and maybe Mike Bobo comes in there and he is the answer as offensive coordinator. And all of a sudden, when the big boys come in there, it's not South Carolina as a double-digit underdog. All of a sudden, it's South Carolina +4, South Carolina +2, South Carolina slight favorite. What would this place be like then? South Carolina is a fun place to go. Athens, Georgia. Sanford Stadium is the number 4 on the list. Now, Sanford's very unique unto any other stadium on this list. And one of the things that I love the most about the city of Athens and the University of Georgia campus, along with Sanford Stadium, is topography. Or, Colin, how would you say this? Typographically? Geographically. Let's just say it like that. It's built sort of into the countryside. A lot of hills. It's not flat. It's not Kansas. And so the stadium is the same way. It's kind of built into a hill. When you walk in, the media entrance is this like massive ramp that looks like it would come out of pro wrestling somewhere. Got to be careful, especially if it's raining, which it was last time I was there when they played A&M. Saw Jimbo Fisher get off the bus. Right there to greet him, Jimmy Sexton, his agent. I digress. We've told a lot of Sexton stories on the show. They got a media suite that's right there, accessible right off the field, which is nice. Don't take it for granted because not every stadium has them. They feed you very well. They just recently got unlimited, all-you-can-drink iced coffee, and that's also something that you don't overlook, especially considering how arduous the drive out of there is after any kind of big game. And also, the fans there create a really unique experience. And especially now, this is a credit to Kirby Smart. They have re-energized what was already a very, very passionate fan base to the point where their home games now are recruiting spectacles. I actually was not at the Notre Dame game this past year. I was elsewhere. But the Notre Dame game's a perfect example. Colin showed you the B-roll of it a little while ago. That was a game where the result on the field, a lot of you called it a boring game. No one cares about that. They won. What people care about is if I was a high school sophomore or junior there, I still remember that. And if Georgia's recruiting me, that is better than anything they can put on a postcard. It's better than any kind of hype video they can show me. They just say, hey, you remember that night you were here for that Notre Dame game? Remember that light show we put on? You remember how we bathed the entire stadium in a sea of red beforehand? You remember how charged that was? Why don't you come be a part of that? What they've done with the game day experience there in Athens is pretty awesome. My number 3 is Alabama. I think I somewhat take Alabama for granted because Alabama and Auburn games are the ones that I've been to the most. because being where I'm from, those are the two teams that we covered a whole lot. And because my role normally requires me to be the biggest SEC game every week, Alabama's in the biggest SEC game a lot. So I've probably covered 2 or 3 dozen games at Bryant-Denny Stadium over the course of the last few years, several years. So you could argue number one for Alabama is my point. Everything about that place is awesome, especially if you have media parking. If you don't, get there 5 hours early. Or if the president's there, as was the case with the LSU game this past year, get there about 7 hours early. But a game day in Tuscaloosa is awesome. Their team colors, I don't know why this stands out to me, but it does. The crimson and white, when you see a bunch of it collected together, it looks awesome. It's a very good postcard kind of moment. There is no buffet in college football. There is nowhere on this planet that feeds media better than they do at Alabama. I think it's somewhat inexplicable because you don't have to pay for it and it's overkill. However, I hope they never change it because it's great. And it's selfishly why I get there so early, because they also do not make you take a meal ticket, which means you can get all you want to. And I'm the kind of person who really, really takes advantage of that kind of situation. So everything about the game day experience at Alabama is fantastic. I actually think, because they got that light show put in just like Georgia does, because Alabama's entire bowl is enclosed, when it's a night scenario, I actually like their light show. I think it looks even better than Georgia's does. Georgia's is awesome. But Alabama's, because you got the entire bowl enclosed, I think it looks a little bit better. I had a buddy who actually ended up covering a game with me this past year, I think it was the LSU game, talking about how overblown that light stuff was. And I agree, 99 times out of 100, some of this spectacle, gimmick type stuff that gets a lot of people riled up, like hype videos, for example, I've never cared about hype videos. Just like you would think I would not care about stadium lighting. You guys who have seen this stuff in person understand, you got to see that stuff in person. Those light shows, the way they do that now, they got it at Bryant-Denny, they got it at Georgia, they'll have it eventually at every stadium. It's pretty surreal. It doesn't look like you're in real life. It looks like you're in a movie, but you know that you're there in real life. So I don't know. I can't describe it. You have to experience it. My number 2 stadium, this could easily compete for number 1, is Kyle Field at Texas A&M. I've only been to one game there. Finally got it off the bucket list. It was this past year. It was Alabama in town. Alabama ended up beating them pretty soundly. Texas A&M does not get the credit as a program, as a stadium, that they deserve because they're new to the SEC, still relatively speaking, and they're not geographically centered where everyone's around them. They're out in College Station, Texas, and it's just like Missouri being in Columbia. You know, yes, they're talked about, but they're not talked about like Auburn or Georgia or Florida or Alabama are, and they should be. This atmosphere is insane. The stadium is insane. I told this story previously. I'll tell it one more time. Obviously, if Alabama's in town, it's the CBS 2:30, 3:30 game. It's going to be sold out. And so when I went to this game this last year, I assumed, traffic's about to be a nightmare here. I got a buddy who covers Alabama, who is a grad of A&M, who was at the game. And so I talked to him ahead of time. He said, I don't think it's going to be that big a problem. I said, okay, we'll see. You've been there. You'll be there already in town. I got to come in on game day. So I flew into Houston, rented a car, drove to College Station. Not a big deal at all. I drove in, and you would think that they may have been holding a booster event for 5,000 people with the way traffic was. And I never even came to a complete stop unless I was at a stoplight. Get in, parking, media parking, get in the stadium, got 107, 108,000, whatever there, it's packed, capacity crowd, and I find him there, and I say, you were right. How in the world did I just get in here and avoid all this traffic? Did I find some magic way in? He said, no, man, people just got here Wednesday. And he was right. The more I thought about it, they all just showed up Wednesday or Thursday. And they're there for Midnight Yell on Friday. And so a majority of them are already there to where, hey, if you're driving in on Saturday, it's not all that big a deal. The entire underbelly of the stadium is modernized. It is such where you don't have to, from the press box, which is 10 miles in the air, by the way, much like Neyland, to get to stadium. You never have to walk through the crowd. A lot of the older stadiums, you do have to do that. Not that I'm against walking through the crowd. It takes a long time. And so everything about Kyle Field is wonderful. It is such where when you're walking through the press areas, it's like you're in a major arena, an indoor facility. It doesn't look like you're in a football stadium. Normally, the football stadiums, it's really dark, it's really damp, it's concrete, dirt floor. You never know what you're going to get. With Texas A&M, it looked like you were in, I don't know, like Phillips Arena or whatever that place is called now in Atlanta, Bridgestone Arena here in Nashville. When you're underground, that's what it looks like. So I love everything about Kyle Field, Texas A&M, completely modernized. And when, not if, for some people who know who they are, who are watching now, when Texas A&M finally ascends to the A tier of college football under Jimbo Fisher and the full spotlight of college football is on them, Kyle Field will rightly become known as one of the very top venues in college football. It already is. People just don't talk about it like that. Number one is Tiger Stadium at LSU. I don't know where. I know where the idea that Tiger Stadium at night is the most intimidating environment college football came from. That's easy to understand. It is. It became kind of in vogue not too long ago for some people to start hating on that, calling it a myth, calling it overhyped. Well, I've been there for quite a few big night games. Against Bama, I was there for the day game against Georgia a couple of years ago, been there the last 2 Auburn games. There's no environment like it in sports, I don't think, at least not that I've experienced, and I've been to all these big stadiums. Everything that they say about that place is accurate, and then some. But you got to be there when LSU's competitive, because their fan base is very smart, and they're smart enough to understand when it doesn't matter if they invest emotionally anymore. Well, when you're there, when they're fully vested emotionally, it's a special, special place. And here's the other thing that stands out. It's a very uncomfortable walk if you are not associated with LSU. I say this in the best of ways, in the most complimentary of ways. It's a very uncomfortable walk going from wherever you've parked until you get inside that place. And we get there before it opens to the public. So once you're in the relative silence of the building itself, you're all good. Walking through tailgate areas, walking in, it's uncomfortable because if you're not with them, you're viewed as being against them. And so it's very hostile. Everything they say about it is true. It's a very hostile environment. But once they realize, oh, you're friendly to us, well, then you're welcome, and they act like you're their brother. So, hey, that's the treatment I get when I go to LSU, and I love it. But if you are a rival fan, if you're a road fan, and you're rolling in there and you're wearing the colors, I'd leave the women and children at home. That's what I would do. You guys can do whatever you want to. It's your life. It's not my life. But it's a very uncomfortable place unless they know you and recognize you as one of them. And if they recognize you as one of them, it's one of the best places on earth. Easily one of the best places on earth to watch a game. So LSU 1, A&M 2, Alabama 3, Georgia 4, South Carolina 5. That's how I rank the stadiums that I've covered games at in the SEC.